Welcome back. This is a meeting of the City of Albuquerque Civilian Police Oversight Agency Board. I am the chair of the board, Eric Olivas speaking. We are reconvening from a brief recess, and we will resume with our serious use of force cases, officer-involved shooting cases. These are cases that have been reviewed by the Force Review Board with APD. Findings have been reached in those cases by the Force Review Board, and those findings have also been reviewed by the Civilian Police Oversight Agency. And one of the final steps in the process is for the board to complete its review of these cases. The board reviews the findings of the FRB, and the board may also request additional information, additional files, as it has in some cases tonight. So with that, we'll go ahead and start with case A19-00777270. And I will go ahead and recognize Dr. Cass to introduce this case and the agency's findings.
Thank you. So this, I can read the director's findings, or at least a description of the case as presented in the director's findings. And then I have, would like to introduce a motion, and at which time we can have some discussion about the review of this case. I recognize that there were a number of problems accessing the information, and we're going to have a discussion about that later when we get to the agenda item dealing with the selection of next month's cases. But hopefully there was enough ability by board members to review this case and go forward with our own assessment of the outcome. But let me describe the case. It was a situation where the victim, Mr. S, was suspected of waving and pointing a weapon at vehicles as they passed his location at the bus stop at 340 Eubank Northeast. Officers 1 through 7 approached the subject from the north with a force array in a flank line formation. Officers failed to provide themselves any cover from potential gunfire from a suspect that was reportedly waving and pointing a weapon at vehicles as they passed by. Officers began shouting commands at Mr. S, with which he did not comply. As Mr. S moved from a lying position on the sidewalk to a seated position on the bus stop bench, he reached toward his waistband. Officer 1 then fired his handgun. Officers 2 fired his rifle. Officer 3 fired his rifle. Officer 4 attempted to fire his rifle, but had not chambered around. And Officer 5 fired his 40 millimeter rifle. Mr. S died at the scene. I'll forego the director's finding at this point, but I just wanted to read that as a description of the case. And then what I've done is I've reviewed this case, and I would propose a motion that we send a letter to the chief of police with our findings, which in my case, if we adopt those, I find several troubling problems with this case. And so with that sort of preamble, I would like to just propose that I start this by moving that we adopt a letter of finding that, and I will read this so that we're operating from the same position. But in APD case 19-00777270, an officer-involved shooting case from August 22nd, 2019, the Civilian Police Oversight Agency board members reviewed this case versus the relevant Albuquerque Police Department standard operating procedures in effect at the time. The board discussed this case at the August 12th, 2021 meeting. By majority vote, the board, and this is where we have to decide whether we concur or not concur with the findings of the Force Review Board on June 11th of 2020. And I've listed the areas that are also listed in the Force Review, in the IA investigative findings presentation, which is the PowerPoint file that you all had an opportunity to review. And then in addition to that PowerPoint file, there's the Force Review Board report, which may or may not support what was given in the PowerPoint review. So those in both those reviews, there are categories of officer misconduct, and there are findings by the IA investigative agency, IAFD, IA Force Division. There are deficiency findings by both the IA Force Division and the FRB referrals. And then there are concerns which are expressed in IA findings and in the FRB finding. And so I would propose that we compare what we decide versus what was in the various categories that are suggested or that are listed in the IA PowerPoint presentation and in the FRB review of that PowerPoint presentation. So there's levels of review here, and I'm just trying to set the stage for those levels of review. So without going into essentially the findings by the IA presentation were that there were no identifications of officer misconduct in the areas of policy violation, violation of criminal law, constitutional violations, violation of personnel rules, violation of administrative rules or regulations. And the FRB does not address those specifically. At least I could not find that in the FRB reports. And in the area of deficiencies, the IA findings were that there were no, in terms of, I'll just read these, no tactical deficiencies. A training deficiency was identified. No deficiencies were identified in terms of policy, equipment, or supervision. The FRB referral was that there was a tactics deficiency, a training deficiency, a policy deficiency, equipment deficiency, and the supervision deficiency. So then there were concerns that were raised. There were no concerns except for a training concern raised by the IA review, but there were concerns that were raised by the FRB review. And I will read those from the FRB. So there were two meetings where this policy was considered. There was an April 23rd presentation by the IA Force Division to the FRB, and there was a referral then from the FRB that said IAFD, in their report, said IAFD will reopen investigation to address concerns of policy, tactics, training, equipment, and supervision. That is, IC not established, perimeter not established, equipment, for example, vehicle cover not utilized. What steps were taken to secure the scene and slow things down, and why wasn't this done? So that was the findings on April 23rd by the FRB. On June 10th at the FRB meeting, the referral said IAFD will reopen. Oh, and by the way, there was a deadline to answer these referrals from the April 23rd meeting on May 21st. On June 10th, at the FRB meeting, there was a referral that IAFD will reopen commander investigation to address concerns of policy, tactics, training, equipment, and supervision. I just read that. But so it was essentially the same items that they referred to back in the June or the April 23rd meeting. So it's essentially an identical statement that was put into the June 10th FRB meeting minutes. Along with that was a statement of action taken, which was the IAFD Commander X responded advising Sergeant Y, conducted further investigation by interviewing Officer Z and asking him why he did not use a vehicle for cover. The officers chose not to use the vehicle for cover due to the congested traffic to maneuver through. They also feared if the individual saw them coming in the SUV, he would engage to stop traffic. This is the thought process he went through to approach on foot rather than use the vehicle for cover. The verbal audio interview is attached in the file in IA Pro. And this was an update that was marked as being due on July 23rd. So, how this got into the June 10th report isn't quite clear to me. So, given these findings by the FRB and the IAFD, I would move that we would send a letter expressing these findings and our agreement or disagreement with these findings, and ask that APD respond in writing to our request, to our concerns, and present at our next regularly scheduled meeting their explanation of their findings in this case. So I suggested that they be given 21 days to respond in writing to these concerns, and as yet to be identified by us, but respond in writing to our concerns, and then appear and explain to us what happened, or what was the justification for their findings, and stand for questions at that time. So that's kind of a long process, but with that, I think I would like to open this up for member discussion. If I can have a second to that motion.
I'll second your motion.
So if that's clear, I mean, it's clear that what we're asking for is a letter to the FRB, to the chief. This is a letter addressed to the chief to ask for an explanation for the IA findings and the FRB findings. So I'm open for discussion. If you would like me, I can first give you the my concerns about this case, or I can wait until others have expressed their concerns. I don't want to, be the first necessarily, unless that's the process you'd like to follow.
So I see Member Johnson has his hand up. Member Johnson.
Thank you. Man, where do I start? I think my concern was that if they would have had a covered vehicle, then they may not have needed the force that was needed, because the man ended up dying. Another thing is I saw them flank on one side, but not on the other. And I also read it where it said that I heard them say, well, let's go like this so we can cover, if there's any traffic. But if the man was shooting where he had a gun, then I don't see how their bodies were a better alternative than pulling up some cars and securing the perimeter. So first, securing the perimeter, stopping traffic as far down as you need to. I know that area, maybe at the what's it called? The freeway, where you get off on the freeway, and maybe down past where Sam's Club is, that light. Maybe you just stop all traffic and you're able, because when they came up with this plan, I saw everybody with guns drawn, but I was like, well, that's kind of weird. If he has a gun, why is nobody really protecting themselves? And then two, I was like, well, why didn't they not bring anybody on the other side? So, there's a stop, there's a bus stop, and then there's everybody on this one side, but nobody on the other side. And then the other thing is when they approached him, I don't know how they drove up, but he was laying down. And I want to believe that it almost appeared like he was asleep. And with that being said, could it have been a lot quieter to roll up on him, because he didn't even recognize that they had ran out to the street. He didn't recognize it until they started yelling commands. Then he woke up and then he responded. Although I know that, I saw the CO2 cartridges and all that type stuff that was on the floor. I went through all of it. So I think my concerns was more the covered vehicle and the tactical part side of it. I don't really know that much, but when he appeared to be asleep, man, if you wake me up, even at home, kind of yelling at me, it's going to startle me a little bit, so, and I'm not expecting you. So I think my concerns there, I would definitely agree with a letter to see what was going on there, because there was no covered vehicle, and it seemed like that there had to be some type of training deficiency that was going on here. I think those were my biggest concerns. And then too, when you pulled up and you didn't see the person waving the gun like it was reported, did you go in just with that thought in mind? Or when you roll up and you're coming from behind, you obviously see him laying down. So he's not saying that he didn't wave it. Also, I read that they had to cut it off of his waistband. Okay, so it was really, really attached to him. So there was just a lot of concerns on, did you go in with a premeditated plan? And I'm not a policeman, so I don't want to disregard their expertise, but these are the questions that came up for me. So I just wanted to start off the discussion with that. Thank you.
Other board members? Seeing none, Dr. Cass, go back to you.
Yeah, so let me, my concern centered around two general areas. One is at roughly 3 o'clock, almost exactly 3 o'clock, the call, there were several officers from SWAT who were at the SWAT headquarters at Wyoming who responded to this call, and they joined field officers at a point near this bench, 150 or 200 yards away. So there was a mixed group, and from 3 o'clock to when they actually started to drive over there until 3:10 when the subject was killed, that was the total extent of the time together of this squad, which actually conducted the shooting. And so during that time, I looked through the officer interviews and the materials that we were given. I could find no evidence that a plan had been created as to how this was going to be conducted, other than to some recognition to protect the people in the area, recognizing that there was still traffic going by, but not having the time to stop the traffic. And there was also then no plan created for de-escalation. And let me be clear here that SOP 252, which is in effect at the time, is the use of force general, which was published in June of 2017. SOP 252-4A1, which is use of force requirements. Policing at times requires that an officer exercise control of a violent or resisting subject to make an arrest or to protect the officer, other officers, or members of the community from risk of imminent harm. Clearly, not every potential violent confrontation can be de-escalated. However, officers do have the ability to impact the direction and the outcome of any situations they handle based on their decision-making and the tactics they chose to employ. The officer should consider and use, where appropriate, de-escalation techniques. Paragraph 2, the following paragraph says, officers should continually assess the situation in order to increase an officer's ability to bring a situation to a safe, peaceful conclusion. This conclusion may be accomplished by using time, distance, information, isolation, teamwork, force array, coordination, and other techniques to maximize an officer's advantage. So that requires a plan, and it requires a de-escalation plan. And I can find no indication in any of the interviews or this information that a de-escalation plan was created, let alone considered. I found no conversation in the interviews regarding de-escalation, and so it seems to me that this is a problem with the tactics that were used, which would be in violation of SOP 2-52. And I have a list of the appropriate paragraphs. I would also note that the group that was formed, this was not considered a tactical activation, even though I believe 3 or 4 of the officers were tactical members who joined the field in responding to this incident. So there also did not, even so, as a result of that, this mixed group, I also couldn't find any evidence of who was leading, who was directing the activities of the group. So whether this is in, I mean, there are SOPs which relate to supervision deficiencies or supervision requirements, that there be someone responsible for an operation of this importance, of this severity, and I could not find any information regarding that. So those are the basis of my grounds for asking for a further explanation from APD for the actions that were taken at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Cass. Other board members? Member Amihu Pruitt.
Thank you, Dr. Cass. I really appreciate you putting that all together in that way. I had noticed some of those I had made some of those same observations, and I had wondered. I saw one officer in that situation say, I think that either he had been told or he had seen that the person was prone on the ground, but nobody responded to that statement at all, like in terms of how that would affect what they were going to do next. And yeah, I did have some concerns around that. Also, that while they have to think about, where best to approach to protect the public, they were talking about where their bullets were going to go, right? Making sure that they went to the empty building there, the empty store. And it didn't seem like they were as concerned with where his bullets might go, right? Either, as they were on the traffic side. So I feel like that's, I would be in favor of the approach that you're recommending, Dr. Cass. Thank you.
Other board members? Member Nixon.
Yeah, I'm in favor of getting more information and getting an explanation. It's I first saw this on YouTube, this shooting by APD on YouTube, and it was disturbing then. It was even more disturbing now to go through all of the footage, all of the cameras. I don't know that I had all the files that you had, Dr. Cass. So, yeah, I would like to go through this. I think I was under the impression that if a police officer shot someone and basically incapacitated them through shooting them with a gun, that they would have to administer medical care to that person immediately. I was under the impression that at that point that was a human being. So at that point, they would now, this is part of the duty of being a police officer, you would have to do everything you could to save that person's life. Instead, what I saw is officers walking around. I saw one man handling this person's body after the gun had been removed, and handling it in a way, handcuffing him. I don't know, maybe being shot as many times as being as elderly as he was a threat, and then kind of wrangle him to the ground and stuff. I thought about the elderly. I thought about homeless people. I thought about a lot of those things, just seeing how these officers treated this man after they killed him. So there's a lot of stuff to unpack on this, but it was quite disturbing when you consider everything that Member Richards, Member Johnson had said about this, and everything Member Cass had said. We don't need an explanation. We need an explanation as well, but I'd like to know what disciplinary action is taken as well with these officers, and if they're still on the force, if they're still in uniform and doing that. I would like to see what an actual outcome was from the infraction or this situation and scenario to what has come now. Where are these people now? What are they doing? in service at APD. So I'm in favor of what Dr. Cass has proposed.
Yes, Member Mitchell.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. The officers did administer medical care. They tried compression. They also applied, not tape, but whatever they have to stop bleeding. So I don't know if Eric, if you were able to see that video, but with the first one I saw, I didn't see him giving medical, but then I found another video, OBR, where they did do that. So just a point of clarification. The only thing, I would say is that was very painful to watch. But I also thought there were 5 officers there and every one of them made the same decision. And I don't know that mitigates anything. And I don't know if there were training deficiencies. I think it's probably any time that kind of force is used, I'm sure there's always a chance to go back and rethink that and how it should have been handled. And I would encourage and support what Dr. Cass is asking, because I think it will encourage the police department to take a critical look at that and provide more information. So that's pretty much all I have to say.
I just want to make one clarity. Yes, I did see the CPR. I saw the whole thing, and I watched all the videos that were available to me at that point, and that's what was so disturbing. You can say, yeah, it's CPR. Yeah, they did the sucking chest wounds and tried to patch them up, but when you looked at how they did it and what they were doing, being that they're police officers, it was deplorable. You could call it that. I guess technically you could say the guy punched him on his chest when he wasn't even in a position. Can be considered, compressions and things like that. But all right, that's all I have to say.
Member French.
I want to say that I agree with Member Johnson and Member Nixon. I watched that video several times, as horrible as it was. For me to watch, to see if there was an opportunity for someone to come from the opposite direction, because he was laying down. And if you're trained, I just felt like they could have apprehended him if they would have used a different tactics other than to come from that side where they startled him and make him sit up. So I was very concerned about that. But as Member Nixon said, I watched that several times. I even looked from the time he said he's still breathing till the time he administered CPR, and it was over 5 minutes. Over 5 minutes. And the other issue was, yes, he was bleeding, and the way when they cut his shirt off and flipped him this way and then flipped him that way, I almost cried. I know the man was dead, but it was just no concern for him. And I hope his family doesn't get to see the way they treated his body. And then there was one officer that actually put the bandage or whatever to stop the bleeding. And then he said he needed more. And one other officer that I saw, just one other officer, went and got something to help him. The rest of them were just standing around or somewhere else. And I just thought that they didn't do everything they could have to save his life. And the treatment of him, even after they realized that he was deceased, was just inhumane to me. And maybe because they deal with this every day, and in some ways you have to become insensitive. You can't take all this home. But I just, and then the second time when they flipped him over, because he had been bleeding and laying in his own blood, when they turned him back over, he was just, it was horrible. It was hard to watch. But I did watch it several times to make sure that I was correct. And the length of time when he said he's still breathing till the time he started administering CPR, and how many actually tried to help stop the bleeding. And that was a concern to me. It was, but I agree with you, Dr. Cass, we need to see on those infractions what was done, because I agree with you. There was nothing done to stop this. because the man was laying down. And he didn't get up immediately either. And when he got up, you could tell he was maybe partially drunk, the way he acted. So I just, like I said, I agree with you. That's all I have to say on that.
Thank you, Member French. Member Armijo Pruitt, I think you had raised your hand before.
I did. Thank you. I was going to basically say something very similar to what Member French said about the time lag, and that it seemed to almost be an incidental noticing of the fact that the man was still breathing. I mean, I could be wrong, but he was just, the officer was standing above him and was like, "Oh, dude, he's still breathing," which seems like it didn't look like an intentional check to see if he was still breathing. The other thing that I wondered about, and I don't know how to consider this in any of the rest of it, but when these kinds of things happen, when these responses occur, and so when they're sitting there and they're thinking, okay, we have to make sure that, he doesn't shoot into traffic and we don't shoot other people when we shoot at him, are they already putting EMS on notice that something could happen? I know they have to clear the scene before they can call, and so that it's safe to call them in. But I was just wondering about that component of it, what the process, if anybody's aware of what that process looks like, if there's back channeling that happens through dispatch or something. Just curious.
Member Johnson.
Yeah, and one last thing, I'm not, I believe none of us are trained as police officers. This is going to be short, but without the cover vehicle, and without the plan, without adjusting, once you have assessed it and saw that there's nobody walking, I think with all of you going out there, not only did you put him in imminent danger, but you also put yourself, because there's no recourse if you're standing out there with the rest of the policemen and you don't have a cover vehicle. Well, then if he's reaching, then the only option is use of force. I just didn't understand how come you would put him in that situation and how come you would put yourself without having some type of cover, because there's only a couple of ways that's going to end. I think that's the part that bugged me the most. And I'm done. Thank you for.
Other board members. Dr. Cass.
Yes, and I will belabor the point, but I think this is one of the things that concerns me is that if de-escalation is to be taken seriously, then all of the things that you've mentioned, Member Johnson, are appropriate to consider. I mean, cover especially is, but the idea of doing de-escalation and resolving this situation peacefully, which is the intent of the SOP that they're operating under, is that you buy time, you buy you create time so that by having cover, so that you can gain the trust of the person that you're de-escalating or attempting to de-escalate the situation with. If you don't buy that time that you need to create the trust, then you can't begin to de-escalate a situation. But also, something that came out of this is that has recently been a change in the SOPs is that it's been recognized that or reinforced that commands are not considered de-escalation. So giving someone a command to put your hands in the air and then following that immediately by getting on your stomach, those aren't de-escalation techniques. And at the time that this policy or this occurred, that particular bit of information hadn't been made official, but it was sort of implied within the de-escalation technique. Now it's specifically recognized that giving someone commands is not de-escalation, and that there are particular ways that you go about de-escalating. Those were not, in my view, I could not find any evidence that those were followed.
So I certainly don't want to cut this discussion short. This is a heady issue, but I think most members have offered their opinions, and I think that at this point in time, my personal opinion is that the best course of action here is to get further explanation from APD, given that there are conflicting outcomes even within their own reports, and I think it would be useful to have them offer additional information as to where these are coming from and what sorts of outcomes were reached from these. So I do support your motion, and I think that additional information could be very useful in coming to a conclusion on this case. Yes, Member Nixon.
Yes, can I make one suggestion? Can we also get information on the outcome? I understand that, we need to get in more information on what happened and maybe get some explanation, but the outcome on this process. I mean, I see the report, there are a lot of things that were sustained, a lot of things done wrong, but I'd like to see what the reaction was to that and saying, okay, in light of this case, this is what the outcome was, and this is what happened. There may be changes in SOPs, policies, may have been disciplinary action, whatever it is, but I just have to know that what happened after this, what this process is to learn from on this. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Cass.
Yes, I'd just like to add one more thing, and that is, actually two things. In response to Member Nixon, the MATF finding is available in the information, and if you read that, the MATF finding was this was within policy action. So in terms of discipline, punishment, and so on, there were no findings that required discipline since this was within action. So you can look for there. I'm sure more details will be forthcoming, but generally that this was found to be an inaction, or there were some concerns, but there was no discipline given. I would like so the other thing I would like to do is just to sort of wrap this up is to read the findings of Director Harness, who reviewed this case, attended the FRB meeting, and whose description, narrative I read from his letter. But I believe it's important to have his findings on record with the board as well. And so his findings are, the CPOA finds Officer 1's conduct sustained where the investigation determines by preponderance of the evidence that the alleged misconduct did occur. He also finds the Officer 2's conduct sustained, that the alleged misconduct did occur. He finds that Officer 3's conduct was sustained, where allegation of by preponderance of the evidence that the alleged misconduct did occur. Likewise, he finds that Officer 4's conduct was sustained with respect to the alleged misconduct. Officer 5's conduct is exonerated regarding the allegation of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by preponderance of the evidence that the alleged conduct did occur, but did not violate APD policies, procedures, or training. And the last finding is Officer 6's conduct was exonerated regarding the allegation of the violation of the SOP, which that the violation of policies did not occur. And these are the two officers, one of whom fired the beanbag round, I believe, and the other was who did not fire his weapon because he had not chambered a round. So that's a summary of the director's findings in this case.
So we do have a motion and a second on this to send this letter requesting both a written and oral presentation on this case by APD, assuming this would be likely IAFD or a representative of FRB. Any further discussion here? Dr. Cass, are you satisfied that the motion in its current form completes what you'd like to? I know that a number of your findings were to be filled in by the board. Do you feel like you have sufficient evidence to fill those in?
So what I would fill in, and the board can weigh in on this, but that with regard to tactical deficiencies, there was a de-escalation failure, which was covered by SOP 252-4, paragraphs A, B, C, and E. And then there was in my mind, I'm not sure how it fits into an SOP, but I'd like the question answered as to how a mixed group of field officers and SWAT officers were assembled without having clear leadership and direction as to how their operation was going to be performed. And then I believe there's a similar question regarding supervision. There did not seem to be a supervisor as part of this operation. And again, I'm not quite sure what SOP this would be covered under, but the authority doesn't seem clear to me at all that this was authorized in a proper way. So those are the concerns and questions that I would like to include in the letter to the chief.
I would like to offer an amendment to the motion to delegate final edits and final authority to word that to Dr. Cass.
As long as we can add to that, yeah. Okay. A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any debate on the motion to amend to allow a...
Member Galloway has a hand.
Yes, I see. Vice Chair Galloway.
Okay, a couple of things just on that last one. I don't think that can be a second to the motion. I think that if we're delegating all final edits to Member Cass, I don't think that we can then say yes, but only if we get to have input on that as well. I think that is, that doesn't work.
Yes, but that would be in the second, that would be in the original motion, correct? That we could amend that further.
Okay, then maybe I need to go back to what your motion, Chair Olivas, was to delegate all edits to Member Cass?
Yes, so that
and finalization?
Correct, so we don't have to produce final text right here for our staff.
Right, and then the second was as long as we can make edits. So I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I take that back because I think that Eric was saying exactly what I was saying anyway by giving Dr. Cass the edits, so I take that back.
Okay, and then back to the original motion, I am unclear as to whether we are providing a finding or we are providing a concurrence or non-concurrence with the findings of IAFD, or if we're just requesting additional information.
Dr. Cass, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that we're not providing any findings. We are requesting additional information. We're not making any conclusions.
I think this needs some discussion, perhaps. I would originally I would have written this letter in terms of saying we do not concur in these particular areas because we have questions about the tactics that were used where we think that there was a deficiency in the tactics, for example, whereas FRB says there's a deficiency in the tactics, but they really don't identify them and they don't do anything to correct them. So because there's, we're both calling for a deficiency, maybe we don't need to talk about concurrence. We're just asking for more information and that may be the appropriate way to go. So I think it should be written in that way, is that we're asking for more information. It's not, and mainly we're asking for more information because it's not clear how we would disagree, given that we think there's a problem with the tactics and there were tactical deficiencies identified by the FRB. So yes, to Member Olivas, yes, we can do this without putting non-concurrence in. We can just ask for more information.
Do we need to clean up that motion?
parliamentary procedure wise here, we're on an amendment. The amendment is to delegate final edits to Dr. Cass. We're not on the original motion at this point. So at this point, if there's nothing further that's directly on this topic, I'd like to call the question on this amendment. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Barela, could you call the roll?
Yes. Member Emil-Pruitt?
Yes.
Member French?
What are we voting on? I'm confused. Are we voting on the original?
This is an amendment that we are voting on to delegate final edits to Dr. Cass.
Did we vote on the first one, or we're now voting on the?
No, this is an amendment.
Did you amend your original motion? I'm not understanding the amendment. Is it amendment to what?
The original motion was made and seconded, so now a change to that motion must be made through amendment.
So it's amendment to the original motion. Okay,
Correct.
Then yes.
Point of order, that's not actually an amendment. It's just a second amendment to delegate the writing of the letter. We're not amending the original motion.
You can't have two motions on the floor.
Yes, that's why we're on the amendment. And the amendment is in addition. It's an addition to the original motion to delegate the authority to draft the letter to Dr. Cass.
Okay.
And I voted yes.
Member Galloway?
Yes.
Member Johnson?
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass?
Yes.
Member Mitchell?
Yes.
Member Nixon?
Yes.
Member Olivas?
Yes.
That passed unanimously.
Now we return to the original motion, which has been amended to allow final edits by Dr. Cass. So if there's any further discussion or additional additions or alterations that members would like to offer to this, now would be the time. Yes, Vice Chair Galloway.
I think a friendly amendment to change the language that was originally in there about the concurrence, non-concurrence stuff, and just make it simply the request for additional information as previously discussed.
I think if I can respond.
Yes, Dr. Cass.
Yes, I would say by I assume unanimous vote at the moment. We'll see. By unanimous vote, the board has raised concerns regarding the findings of the Force Review Board on June 11th, 2020 in the following areas. So then to follow that up with the concerns that we've identified and the request for a report.
And
so I'm amending the sentence early in the document that says we do not concur to say we have concerns.
And I think based on the addition that we just made, you have that authority to make that change. So I don't think we need an amendment for that. Just to be clear here, I guess for follow-up wise, we are asking for a written report and an oral report at the September meeting, correct? Okay. Anything further on this? Seeing none, Ms. Barela, would you please call the roll? The motion on the floor here is to send this letter to the chief requesting additional information on these findings and the conflicts with other findings, and Dr. Cass will make final edits to this.
Member Emil-Pruitt?
Yes.
Member French?
Yes.
Member Galloway?
Yes.
Member Johnson?
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass?
Yes.
Member Mitchell?
Yes.
Member Nixon?
Yes.
Member Olivas?
Yes.
That motion passed unanimously. Thank you.